What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I'm going to be bringing you part 4 of my Middle-earth review series with The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Now, before I get into this film, I do want to clarify a few things. The first thing I wanted to clarify is that I did not read the books in tandem with these films, or I did not read the Fellowship of the Ring book in tandem with this film, because when I talked about the Hobbit films, I read the book in tandem, like each of the films of the Hobbit trilogy are based on a chunk of the book, so I read kind of each chunk of the book in tandem with the films, so I was able to make direct comparisons from the book to the films. With these films, I won't be reading the books, because the Lord of the Rings books are really long, and so are the movies, and if I were to kind of keep a good pace of reviewing these, then it would just take way too long to reread the books in tandem with these films, so I just wanted to clarify that, because I will make comparisons where I see it fit, but the books are not as fresh in my memory as the Hobbit book was when I talked about those films. And I do also want to clarify that I did watch the extended version of The Fellowship of the Ring, and I will be talking about the extended versions of Two Towers and Return of the King, because I just prefer them to the theatrical cuts. I think that they add a lot of context that wasn't there in the theatrical version, so perhaps I may be forgetting elements that were different in the theatrical release to the extended release, just clarifying that. So, let's get into the film now, The Fellowship of the Ring. Now, this is a fantastic film, and I love it, but as per usual, I want to kind of list off my negatives first of all, so we can get into the positives. There aren't a lot, but no film is perfect. So, the first thing I want to talk about is that some of the visuals don't hold up super well. Some of the effects haven't aged super well, and I do think some of the effects they added in post in the extended edition. So, like, for example, in the opening prologue, Sauron is just swinging his mace around, knocking dudes out, and it just looks kind of fake. It doesn't look very good. And then there's the scene when Saruman and Gandalf fight in Orthanc, and it's just these two old dudes, throwing each other around. And then Saruman just starts spinning Gandalf around on the floor, and it just looks so funny. And I always used to laugh at that when I was a kid, and everyone would always be like, that's not an appropriate time to laugh. But I just can't take that part seriously. It's just visualized really poorly, and I just find that so funny. It just looks super weird. Just seeing Gandalf spin around on the floor with his feet in the air. It's just funny. So there are some elements in regards to the visuals that do not hold up super well, but that's to be expected because this film is almost 20 years old. And then the next criticism I have of it is something that is not directly involved with this film. It's not a problem with this film in particular. It is a problem with the way Peter Jackson decided to tie the Hobbit trilogy into this trilogy. Now, at the end of The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, Peter Jackson had Gandalf specifically state that he knew Bilbo had a magic ring. When you get to the beginning of this film, Gandalf is shocked by the fact that Bilbo has a ring. In the original Hobbit book by J.R.R. Tolkien, he did not have Gandalf say that Bilbo had a ring, and he did not have Gandalf suspect that Bilbo had a ring. So it just feels like a weird decision that they had Peter Jackson decided to add in this element where Gandalf knew Bilbo had the ring, and then that kind of creates a continuity error going into the Fellowship of the Ring. That's just weird. And then in this film, and I do believe it is something exclusive to the extended edition, even though I may be incorrect on that, is there's a scene where Bilbo is writing his book, and then he goes, "Frodo, where is that boy?" And that doesn't make a lot of sense, because in the Hobbit An Unexpected Journey prologue, Bilbo saw Frodo off as he's going to go see Gandalf, and Bilbo knew where he was going, so I'm not sure why that was added in the Hobbit films. I don't know, it's just kind of, you can see the cracks start to show a little bit, and I feel like they could have tied that in a little better. Perhaps if you watch the theatrical versions only, it will just kind of flow better, but me having watched the extended version, there are some continuity errors, and kind of the connective tissue between them is a little bit weaker than I actually originally thought. But, moving on, I do think there's some weak casting decisions, particularly who a lot of people regard as the main character. I regard Aragorn as the protagonist, but a lot of people regard Frodo as the protagonist. And I don't believe this is any fault of the character. I believe it is a fault of the casting. I find Frodo an unbearable character in these films. To be fair, in this first film, he is the most tolerable of all three, but I think it's the fault of the casting. I think Elijah Wood was poor casting for this character. I I haven't seen Elijah Wood in a lot of other things, so perhaps this is unfair of me, but I feel like he was poor casting, because all the other hobbits are extremely well cast. Sam, Merry, Pippin, all of them are really well cast and suit their characters well. But Frodo in these films is portrayed as just, I know part of it is the ring, but his character is just constantly portrayed as being cowardly and just, I just don't like him. I don't think and he's just so wooden and just not engaging to watch. Martin Freeman is a charismatic guy. He adds that element to Bilbo. And Bilbo, I do believe in The Hobbit, was already a far more charismatic character than Frodo is in The Lord of the Rings. But I don't remember Frodo being such a stick in the mud in the Lord of the Rings books. Because there's just some line delivery here from Elijah Wood where it's just, oh my gosh, man, you need to take some acting classes. Like in the final scene of the film where Sam is swimming across the lake to try to get to Frodo, and Frodo says, "I'm going to Mordor alone." It's like, dude, come on, man. It's weird. He is the most tolerable in this film of all three, as I just said before, but I do feel like Elijah Wood was poor casting. That's just me, but I do not really like Frodo as a protagonist in these films, at least. There are some good moments with him, like when he decides to take the ring, and then everyone else joins him, and that goes back to what Balin said in The Desolation of Smaug about the courage of hobbits. I like that. That's good. But besides that, in this first film, he's portrayed as a coward, and he puts on the ring at the worst possible times, and then gets stabbed and stuff, and it's just kind of stupid. Because in the Hobbit movies, Bilbo put on the ring when he knew it was appropriate. But in these films, Frodo puts on the ring at random times, and then just gets stabbed or whatever else, and he's just kind of portrayed as an idiot. And I just don't really like Frodo. And then Liv Tyler as Arwen, I think was poor casting. Now, they do beef up Arwen's role as a character in the Lord of the Rings book, or in the Fellowship of the Ring book. I do believe that it was a different character that rescued Frodo and took him to Rivendell. So I do think that works better to have that character replaced by Arwen, because I think it was a character that never reappeared. So I think it makes more sense to have Arwen be in place of that original character. But Liv Tyler's just not a particularly strong actress, in my opinion. I haven't seen her in anything else besides The Incredible Hulk, and she sucks in that movie. I mean, to be fair, she is better in this than The Incredible Hulk, but she's just a wooden actress. I feel like the character is useful, and she's not a terrible character on paper, but I do feel like she was poor casting. And then there's just a scene with Galadriel's wife, or not Galadriel's wife, Galadriel's husband, Celeborn, when the Fellowship arrives in Lothlorien, and he just goes, "Tell me, where is Gandalf? I very much wish to speak with him." I'm like, dude, did they just pluck a random guy off the street? That is some of the worst line delivery I've ever heard. And this is just a personal bias. I think Cate Blanchett is a good actress. I think she does a good job narrating the opening, but I cannot take her scenes seriously in this film. They do this weird thing where she's talking in people's heads, and then Frodo's talking in her head, and it's like, where did you learn to do that, Frodo? And I just personally, I can't take her seriously. So many of the other characters or the actors really do inhabit their characters, but she's the one where I can see through her performance, and I feel like she's acting. That's just me. I'm sure she's passionate about the role, but I just can't take her seriously. I can't take her scenes seriously in this film. I think it's just a personal thing, but I just can't really take her seriously. And with that said, that's about all I have to say in regards to negatives about this first film. Let's get into the positives, because I love this movie to death. The first great thing is it has a really great opening. I watched a video recently that highlighted how great this opening sequence is, this prologue is, but it provides you with the perfect amount of information. Keep in mind that the Hobbit films had not been released at this point in time, so people going into this who hadn't read the books would kind of need some context. So they briefly recap the events of the Hobbit and just give you all the information you need to get into this film, and I think it's perfect. The opening does not overstay its welcome. It's just perfect. It's a perfect prologue, and I do like the prologue in The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, but it does feel like it's dragged out a little bit, and there's a little bit of information that you didn't necessarily need to enjoy the story. So I feel like this is just a perfect prologue. And, the added context of the Hobbit trilogy does add a lot of emotional weight to these films. When you see Bilbo and you see this point where he is at in his life, it's really emotional to see him like this, just having been corrupted by the ring, and then this scene in Rivendell where he's just, crying. He just breaks down crying, and it's really hits you. It's really emotional, actually. knowing what this character has gone through. And to people who complain about the Hobbit films, you can't tell me that after watching those, with the added context of those films, watching these movies, you can't tell me that you don't feel something. Because I feel like the scenes with Bilbo in particular in this film would not hold as much weight without the added context of the Hobbit trilogy. And then also the scene with Balin's tomb in the Mines of Moria. Balin's such a nice guy. It sucks that he came to such a horrible end in the Mines of Moria. It's really sad, actually. Although it's kind of hard to take it seriously with Gimli crying in a really cheesy way, but still, really powerful stuff. And the Hobbit trilogy, having existed, does add a lot of emotional weight to events in these films. And, there's just even more great quotes and scenes and just elements in this film in particular. For example, in the scene in the Mines of Moria with Frodo and Gandalf, there's this great moment when Gandalf has two of my favorite quotes of all time back to back. So just to give you kind of a vibe of what's going on in the scene, Frodo sees Gollum and says, "It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance." Gandalf says, "Pity is exactly what stayed Bilbo's hand. Many who live deserve death, but many who die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be so quick to deal out death and judgment." And I think that's such a powerful quote and applies really well to today, our modern society, like how quick people are to judge others and say things that they don't really realize what kind of impact they can have on other people. Like, it's a really powerful quote. Really, really good wisdom there, from Gandalf. And then right after that, Frodo says, "I wish none of this had ever happened. I wish the ring had never come to me." And then Gandalf says, "So do all who come to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All you have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to you." And I think that's such a powerful quote as well, and really just kind of, just really hits you in regards to where we're at in real life right now. You got COVID, you got the pandemic, and it's affected people in a really negative way, especially mentally. And to just hear that again really hit me, to think about there's so much going wrong in the world, but that you have so much time on your hands, and you just need to choose what to do with that time. And I think it's a powerful way. It's always been, but even more so now in today's world, I think it applies really well and hits really emotionally well. And then, there's the scene with Galadriel and Frodo, a scene that I still have trouble taking seriously, but where Galadriel tells Frodo, even the smallest person can change the course of history. And that is true in the context of this series. It applies to real life as well, but it also applies to the context of the series and takes it all the way back to the first film where Bilbo spares Gollum's life. That small action unintentionally made Bilbo kind of the hero of all of Middle-earth, because by sparing Gollum's life, he ultimately ensured the destruction of the ring. That's really powerful. It really works very well. It really makes you think. That's another really great quote. And then, everything takes you back to that original quote from Gandalf where he says, "Saruman believes that it is only great power that can keep evil in check, but I believe it is the small things, everyday acts of ordinary folk." And in this film, Saruman says, "You really thought the halfling could stand in the way of the power of Sauron." And he's wrong. He is wrong to think that, because that's highlighted in this entire series. That quote from Gandalf in An Unexpected Journey is ultimately a thesis for the entire series, because you see that in this film. You see that when Boromir dies, taking arrows to the chest, defending Merry and Pippin. That is extremely powerful. That is extremely well done. I love that quote, and I love how it acts as almost a thesis for everything in this series. And you see that Saruman was wrong. And I really like that they bring that back here. I really like that I guess it's not even they brought it back. They brought it back in The Hobbit. And they made that quote from Gandalf a thesis for the entire series. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's really well done. I also want to point out how well shot this film is, and how all of them are. They're all well shot. The cinematography is amazing. The direction is amazing. And it's amazing how they captured this world, Tolkien's material, just visually. Like, all these locations, Rivendell, Isengard, they're all models. They're all these gigantic miniatures they created. And even stuff like the Balrog and, all these elements, they're real. They made them, they built them. And it shows the passion that Peter Jackson had for this project and for the world of Middle-earth that J.R.R. Tolkien created. And it's really just fascinating to see the production behind it. If you watch the behind the scenes, you see how they kind of really captured that size differentiation between Gandalf and the hobbits. It's just really interesting. You got to watch the behind the scenes, but it's just fascinating how they created it, and it's all really beautifully done. And, even some of the CGI, I complained about it earlier, but some of the effects do hold up really well. They used one of the earliest versions of CGI for the cave troll in the Mines of Moria, and that looks awesome. Like, it actually still holds up really well. I think it's something to do with the lighting of that scene and how they matched the lighting of the cave troll to its surroundings so that it kind of masked some of the less refined elements of the CG model. I think it's really actually holds up pretty well still to this day. And I do want to say one more thing, and that is that the character of Boromir in this film is kind of the star in my mind, because all the characters are extremely well cast, and we'll get into that later because a lot of them get more prominent roles later on, but Boromir is such a fantastic character. And in the theatrical version, they kind of cut out a lot of scenes that give him context. In the extended cut, the first scene you see him in is where he's talking to Aragorn, and he picks up the shards of Narsil and then drops the hilt of the broken sword on the ground and just walks away. And it gives you a bad impression. He seems like kind of a narcissist, kind of like just kind of a selfish guy. And as it goes along, you realize that he is an allegory for that theme of greed, once again, that I already talked about in my previous Hobbit reviews. And you have that scene with Elrond and Gandalf in Rivendell, and Elrond says, "I was there when the Age of Men failed. I saw Isildur fail to throw the ring into the fire." And it highlights how people have an equal capacity for both evil and good. And in the end, Boromir, shows us that. He is the physical embodiment of that. And in the end, he chooses to die defending Merry and Pippin. He takes 3 arrows to the chest and keeps fighting. And that's so powerful. I always love that in everything, that moment of characters continuing to fight despite the odds being overwhelmingly against them and them knowing they have no chance of succeeding, but perhaps they'll give these people a little bit more time. And that's just so well done. That's so powerful, and that character is just extremely well executed. I know it's kind of a meme that Sean Bean dies and everything, but this might be his best role. I haven't seen him in a lot of other things. I saw him in GoldenEye, the James Bond movie, but that movie kind of sucks. So, in my opinion, this is his best role, and I think he captured the character perfectly, and I love that character, and I love how he is the embodiment of that theme, that element. I think he's extremely well done, and he is kind of the star of this film, in my opinion. He's the soul of it, I feel. And if there's anything that I take away from this film, it's him. His sacrifice is easily my favorite moment in this film. Howard Shore's score, just really bringing out the emotions. And, when he dies and he says to Aragorn, "I would have followed you to the end, my brother, my captain, my king." What a powerful little speech at the end there. It's just such a well-rounded character. They really captured him well. And it's just a perfect adaptation. It's just extremely well done. All the action scenes are just captured perfectly, and I don't have a lot to add. That's honestly about all I have to say about this film. I don't have a lot to add that a lot of other people haven't already said about these films, and at least this first film in particular. I love it. I think it's a masterpiece. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of the best ever made. It's one of the best starting points to a series ever. It introduces all these characters, just, builds out this expansive world that J.R.R. Tolkien created and just visualizes everything perfectly. And it's just an amazing achievement and a fantastic film. But it's my least favorite of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's amazing. I still think that. But it does have some things going against it. Just the fact that it's older. It has aged. Some of the casting, I feel, is poor, and some of the visual effects do not hold up super well. That is to be expected once again, and still, a lot of them do hold up pretty well. Compare this movie to a Marvel movie, and it's like astronomical how much better this film looks. But I do feel like it is the weakest of the 3, in my opinion. Of that trilogy, it's my least favorite. It has the most aged elements, but it's still fantastic. It's one of my favorite movies. All 6 of these are my favorite movies of all time, so yeah. That's about all I have to say about The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. You guys please let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, and of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.